After 2 days of violent protests in the streets of Caracas, Venezuela, they're sinking back into political stalemate there. In his latest attempt, self-proclaimed leader Juan Guaido failed to overthrow the Maduro government, even with the help of the United States. Back here in Washington, D.C., the situation at the Venezuelan embassy remains tense. RT's Rachel Blevins is there now and joining us live with the latest details. Rachel?
I'm here outside of the Venezuelan embassy where the standoff continues between protesters who are here supporting opposition leader Juan Guaido, who have been here for a third day now, and activists who support President Nicolas Maduro, who remain inside the building. Now, we saw clashes break out yesterday between the two sides when protesters swarmed the back of the Venezuelan embassy and activists attempted to throw food and supplies to their allies inside. Secret Service intervened and they arrested 2 people from the pro-Maduro side and 1 person from the pro-Guaido side. They then increased the number of barricades around the property, and they later allowed the activists to bring food and supplies inside. Now, the protesters who are here continue to yell, sing, chant, and blast blow horns throughout the night and on into today. But while we've seen clashes here in D.C., citizens in Venezuela appear to be returning to their normal routines for now, despite repeated calls from self-proclaimed leader Guaido for more nationwide protests. Now, we did see violent clashes break out between police and protesters in Venezuela earlier this week. Those clashes resulted in at least 4 people dead and more than 200 people injured. Around 200 people have also been detained as the Maduro government pledges to crack down on anyone who is a part of those protests. Now, while Guaido did receive support from some citizens, he still is not seeing support from the overwhelming majority of the military. And in response to that lack of an uprising, Maduro is calling for unity in Venezuela. Now, back here in the United States, U.S. officials are saying that the only reason Maduro is still in power is because he is receiving support from foreign influences. And this was actually referenced in a statement from the Organization for American States, which said that, according to anonymous experts, Russia and Cuba are playing destabilizing roles in Venezuela's domestic affairs, and they are providing military and political support to help prop up the Maduro government. Now, we have yet to see evidence of this, and that claim was denied by the governments of Venezuela, Russia, and Cuba, but it is a very notable and dangerous accusation. We also learned today that the White House is claiming that President Trump spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin for more than an hour on the phone, and they discussed a number of topics, which included Venezuela. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said that Trump made it clear that the United States stands with the people of Venezuela, but when asked about the possibility of military action in Venezuela, she repeated the claim that is used by a number of U.S. officials, which is that all options are on the table. Reporting from outside the Venezuelan embassy, Rachel Blevins, RT.
All right, joining us now to discuss this further, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute, Daniel McAdams. Daniel, great to see you. First, let's tackle the Maduro issue here. Maduro's calling this a failed coup in Venezuela. Juan Guaido has continued to call for a military uprising, which I think a lot of people know this is a more soundbite-friendly term for riots. Given that he's calling for violence, how do you explain the fact that he continues to walk freely around Caracas?
I do think that the Maduro government understands that Guaido is a red line. The U.S., I think, has made it clear if you touch Guaido, that will give us the catalyst we need to proceed more toward a military solution. But I think, frankly, right now, Guaido is worth a lot more to Maduro free than he's worth to the opposition. To the opposition, he's a symbol of a failed uprising. He's a symbol of an unpopular movement. Maduro wants him around to remind the population of a failed coup, in a way. So, ironically, Guaido finds himself almost a dead man walking when it comes to the opposition. He's worth more to them, frankly, more dead than alive.
So if Guaido is like some sort of bait that the U.S. is kind of using for a reason to go into Venezuela, how can the U.S. do that, given that none of the neighboring countries really support that plan? None of the neighbors support military intervention.
Let's not forget that these neighboring countries are very dependent on the U.S. They are part of, they're jewels in the crown of the U.S. in Latin America. They're dependent on U.S. money. Yeah, they're concerned about refugees, and rightly so. But let's not forget the U.S. maintains its global military empire by printing money, by the Federal Reserve Bank printing money and financing this. So if they need to print a few more $1 billion to hand to Bolsonaro or someone, what's the big deal? They'll just print it up.
So National Security Advisor John Bolton keeps insisting that what's happening there can't really be a coup because Juan Guaido is the legitimate leader. How do you explain that? Is it simply a case of semantics, or do certain words matter here, and why would they matter?
Well, first, let's tackle what he said, and that is not the case. Juan Guaido was not elected president. In fact, he hasn't been elected since 2015 when he ran for the National Assembly. So the idea that somehow he's been deprived of an office for which he ran and was elected is false. But words do matter, and the U.S. doesn't want to be seen as a country involved in a coup, in overthrowing a government. They want to talk about it in terms of restoring democracy. The propaganda war that the U.S. fights is really a war on the U.S., on U.S. citizens and on the U.S. mind. So we have to think of it as a humanitarian gesture. We're fighting socialism. Meanwhile, we have all the same socialist programs that Venezuela has here in the United States. But it's a propaganda war that our government is fighting against us.
And what are your thoughts on Mike Pompeo's assertion that Maduro was 1 foot out the door, but then backed out and decided to stick it out at the behest of Russia?
Well, there's a theory that's gaining ground, and I think there's some credence to it, that this was all part of a big rope-a-dope operation whereby the Maduro officials pretended to go along with this coup to smoke out the opposition and get more intel on what was going on. And then when it came time to spring the coup, here is Guaido standing in front of the airbase with no one around him, looking like a fool. So the question is, did it go all the way to the top? Was Maduro in on this rope-a-dope too? Yeah, John, I'm out of here. I'm taking a plane, no problem. And then when it comes down to it, he's just laughing his head off. That's one possibility. The other is that Pompeo is lying, which he says he's very good at. So either of the two of those don't reflect very well on the United States.
And lastly, we just learned the breaking news that President Trump was on the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin for over an hour. Venezuela was a major issue that they were talking about. What do you expect to come out of those talks? What are we going to hear from the press secretary?
Well, what I hope comes out of them is that President Putin makes it very clear that a U.S. military intervention into Venezuela is absolutely out of the question in terms of Russia's interests. We know right now that there was a meeting earlier at the Pentagon between Bolton, Pompeo, and Acting Defense Secretary Shanahan. That's very dangerous because they're doing war planning. They may be trapping the president into this war, and it just may go over his head. He may not even realize it. So hopefully Putin has made a few things clear to President Trump about his neocon advisors.
All right, we'll have to leave it right there. Always appreciate your insights. Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute, thank you.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.